Hi, everyone. This is America Adapts, the climate change podcast.
Hey, Adapters. Welcome back to another exciting episode. In this pod, we're taking a closer look at one of the most talked about and misunderstood stories in climate adaptation, the relocation of the Île-de-Jean-Charles community in Louisiana. You've probably heard it described as the nation's first climate relocation. But what really happened there? Floodlight News reporter Terry Jones joins me to sort through the confusion, politics, and the human stories behind it all. We talk about why some residents refuse to move, how state and federal agencies stumbled through an unprecedented project, and what this messy experiment tells us about the future of managed retreat in America. Okay, let's get into this episode. Hey, Adapters, welcome back to another exciting episode. Joining me is Terry Jones. Terry is a climate justice and accountability reporter and recently with Floodlight, a nonprofit newsroom focusing on climate issues. Hi, Terry. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Doug.
And can you just give me a little bit of background on you and some of the work that you've done?
Yeah, sure. I'm born and raised Louisiana native, grew up in Baton Rouge, which is part of what an area is known here called Cancer Alley, which is an area in southeast Louisiana that is dotted with a lot of petrochemical industry, very much predominantly Black communities that have been overburdened with pollution. And so it's very interesting because a lot of the areas that I cover, it's about an 11 parish area. And a lot of them, I have family members that live in these areas. So I've always had a unique perspective, and I guess you can say firsthand knowledge of how the petrochemical industry has harmed Black communities here.
So I have you on that you've done a story, and it's about a community that I feel like it's been in the news forever, and I've been mispronouncing it forever, but I'm going to say Île-de-Jean-Charles community in Louisiana, and we're going to talk about that. Can you just, at the 30,000-foot level, tell us what was in that story, and then we're going to dig into the details.
Okay, well, it's called Île-de-Jean-Charles, and it is an indigenous community here in southeast Louisiana. It's in a place called Terrebonne Parish. And this is a community that was lived right along the Louisiana coast. It was a tight-knit community, a fishing community that was forced to relocate because it had become inhabitable due to sea level rise and coastal erosion. And so they were the first ever experiment, fully federally funded relocation effort to move a community that was in harm's way into, I guess you can say, higher ground. And so they were supposed to be this model for the federal government, who realized that we probably will have to do this more than once because of what's happening around the country and around coastal communities everywhere in regards to sea level rise. Florida is one area that comes to mind. There are some places in North Carolina, in New York, are having the same issues that we're having here in Louisiana. Louisiana is unique because we are an area that area along the coast is less populated in regards to people that live there, but Louisiana faces the most land loss to coastal erosion in the country. And coastal Louisiana protects a lot of the country from storms. And so you need that coast for that protection from hurricanes and things like that. And unfortunately, due to climate change, sea level rise, and coastal erosion, we are losing a lot of that coast. And Île-de-Jean-Charles was one of the populated areas that was forced to move.
Let's give my listeners some stats here, though. What is the total number of people, and then how much money did the federal government spend?
So the federal government allocated about $48.3 million in federal community development block grant money, and they were going to relocate 37 residents and 37 households in Île-de-Jean-Charles. Like I said, this was a small-knit, tight-knit community. And so that was about how many people that were going to be moving, or households that were going to be moving there. Some people did stay, though. Some people refused to move. I think there's about 3 households that still live on the island now, but most of the people moved. And even before this money was allocated, you had some households that had already moved because they just realized they were just tired of having to rebuild after hurricanes and storms.
This has always been very confusing to me. This is a tribal community. And so as part of these negotiations, there are actually some competing camps. And then the tribal community and I guess the leadership there didn't necessarily represent everyone in the community. And I guess that led to some problems. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that was one of the things. And so it just to give you a little bit more perspective too. The island was about 22,000 acres originally, and it shrunk to about 320 acres now. That's how much it has been lost over time. And it was a tribe that Chief DeMay, he was the original planner for the relocation. This was even before the federal grant money came about. They actually used his plan to get that federal pot of money. And basically for Chief DeMay, he's no longer the chief now, but during his time period, what he wanted to do was he wanted to reunite his tribe. Like I said, remember I said some people had already moved away. And so he was like, listen, we know we can't live here anymore. We need to get to higher ground. I want to build us a better community. It was going to have a lot of amenities for this new community, better homes, drier ground. They were going to have a community center, retail, just basically their own little mini city that he wanted to build. And okay, fine, great. They got the allocation for the federal funding. Obviously, it had to be administered through the Louisiana Department of Community Development. And so once that started to happen, those conversations started to happen, there was another tribe that was living also on this island. And their chief felt we should be a part of this as well. Chief DeMay kind of wanted it for his tribe. And so therefore they went to the state and said, hey, we have people that live here too. We should be a part of this relocation project. And I think that's where a lot of things got muddled for the state, because then it was like, how do I navigate all of this intertribal politics? And basically the federal government, the state, federal, and the federal government decided that, listen, this relocation project isn't about a tribe. It's about the community that is living there. And so therefore, we have to include everyone that wants to move on this island. We have to include them in this relocation effort. And that really started this breakdown of communication, and things really took a left turn to where people got really disenchanted with the process because they felt like they no longer had a voice in what was happening. But honestly, the state felt we can't just leave these people behind because they're not in your tribe.
And again, the state obviously is heavily involved, but we had a previous conversation and you know that the state isn't really in the business of doing this kind of project. And I guess currently they're just, I don't know if they're trying to wipe their hands clean of it, but I guess the mentality is just, we don't do this kind of thing. And it's really complicating this. Did I get that right?
Yeah, it is. And that's the thing is this was the first of its kind. And so they really didn't have any playbook to go by here. And a lot of the state leaders that I talked to, they just felt like they were doing the best that they could to help this community get to a better living situation. But they also didn't, as you would know, things with federal money, it takes time. You have to have a series of public meetings. There has to be a lot of transparency in regards to what's available to the community. And so this took a lot of time. This was years that this over a course of time. I think the money was allocated in 2016. They didn't start building the other community until 2021. That's how long of a process this was.
Wow.
And I think they were trying to build it right during COVID as well. So that's when so basically once they did start with the construction, the federal government basically said, listen, you have until 2022 to get this done. And if it's not done, you will then lose this money. And so then they had to fast track everything by that time period. And I think that for a lot of the residents that we talked to, they said that was part of the issue as well. They felt like if the state would have taken more time to construct their homes, to build their community, this would have been a lot better of a process for them, because now the issue with them now is that they're living in homes that they feel are poorly constructed. There's already been issues in terms of like appliances breaking down. They've had leaks anytime it rained. Their yards flood. There's all these like construction issues that are now happening that they feel like this maybe wasn't the thing that was promised to them.
So how far away were they moved though? You might have mentioned that. How far is this from the original community?
So they got moved to a place, it's about 30 miles outside of Houma. It's a place, they now call it New Isle, is what they call it. So it was out of Jean Charles, and they call the new community New Isle. And so it's a lot of drier land. Unfortunately, there are some prediction flooding models that have it where if we don't do anything to protect the coast, at least the things that have been committed thus far, that they'll probably live on another island. It'll flood that much and they'll be on another island again, which is crazy.
Say hello to the whole Southeast. All right. You mentioned the residents and the ones that didn't want to move. And I want to dig into that as your own experience talking to them, that there is this threat that's out there, sea level rise, storms and all that. But what did you learn about this resistance? What do you think? Is it just they just don't want to leave their home? What's going on?
I think you have to realize that for a lot of these people, this was their community. Their neighbors were their grandmothers, their aunts, their uncles, their cousins. And living in Louisiana, people have to understand that we have a culture here. And the culture is we love to know who our neighbors are. Let's say, for instance, when a hurricane happens and people are trying to rebuild, you have neighbors that are making jambalaya. Well, I know my neighbor down the street. I'm going to eat their jambalaya. People don't want to lose that community. And that's how these people were. These were the people that they grew up with. There were generations of families that lived here. And they felt like if they moved away, they were going to lose all of that. And also, this was just their home. This is the home that they knew. This was their way of life. A lot of these people were fishermen. That was how they made their living. And they were going to lose that. And they did lose a lot of it moving away because a lot of them are no longer fishermen anymore because they no longer live on the water the way they used to. They literally had the Gulf right in their backyard and they can go out and work and they come home. So it was just a way of life. I think a lot of people can understand this. You don't want to lose your family roots. And for them, this wasn't only just their family roots. This was their history. This was their tribal roots. This was their home that 5 generations of this tribe had lived in. And so it was a tough thing for them to want to do. But they also were very well aware that they had to move. But they were losing a lot of the land. There's only one road in and out of Island of St. Charles. If it flooded too much, they were trapped in there. So they also knew the danger that existed, but they just wanted to stay together.
I guess there's that acknowledgement when it's happening around you, the land is being lost. Did you have a sense that when there's all these different threats, there's this flooding, there's storms, but then sea level rise not only is a current, but a future threat? Did you feel like the community understood the scale of potential sea level rise impacts to it as a driver?
They very much did. They very much did understand it. And they also said, listen, other people are going to have to deal with this in other parts of the country. And so they should get prepared. And their advice, when I asked them, hey, what, you guys say things went wrong here. What advice will you give to other communities? And they say, just as long as you try to maintain your voice, try to maintain as much of your voice as possible because you're going to have to do it. It's going to happen. And we see it happening already around the country. I think one of the things that's so interesting in our series, we also did stories in New York and we also did one in North Carolina. I think the interesting thing that for people that live along the coast is that a lot of these people choose to live on the coast. They know what they're signing up for. And so some of them felt, you know what, this is what I signed up for. This is the price of living on the coast. And I'm willing to face this in order to have this beautiful scenery that I have, in order to have this environment that I have, in order to have this culture that I have. Now, will that always be the case? We'll see. Like you said, we know for a fact that sea level rise is going to continue to be a problem for the next couple of decades. And a lot of these places that we have right now are probably going to be lost. And I think that what was interesting to one of the experts that I talked to from the state's Office of Community Development, he no longer works there now, but he was a part of this Island of St. Charles project. And he said, really and truly, the time to start talking about relocation to homeowners and residents along coastal communities is right after a disaster. Because he always feels right after disaster, that's when people are like, I'm ready to move. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And you can go in, and the federal government just went in right at that moment and offered money and relocation, people would probably do it. He said the problem is the federal government, things take so long to allocate money down that by the time it does come down, residents have started to rebuild their homes. Now they're like, I'm already started to rebuild. I guess I'm going to stay. And so the further you get away from a disaster, the less likely people will then pick up their things and move away. And I thought that was interesting.
This obviously has been an issue for a while, and you haven't been covering it since the beginning. I'm sure there's been lots of public meetings that you weren't able to attend, but do you feel like you encountered, and I think about this like it's, I think you said $43 million, and the number of people is actually quite small. Do you feel that they understand if you're framing it, okay, the federal government is actually providing some resources for this because as you talked about other communities, you look at Charleston, whatever, the federal government is not going to come in and provide that level of assistance. Managed retreat or unmanaged retreat is just going to play out. People are going to leave because there's no insurance and all these kind of things. Do you feel like the community was, I'm trying to be careful how I say this because there's obviously a lot of frustration, but maybe appreciated that there's federal resources to help you do this, and most people will never have that level of help?
I can't say that. I don't know because they really are. Some of them are very angry with how things turned out for them. And even though they understood the dangers, they just really felt like things could have been handled better. Having covered state government for a long time, local governments for a while, I also understand the bureaucracy that is involved in a lot of this. And you can't just give out money willy-nilly because if you do that, we saw that happen in Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. They just gave out money because everyone needed it. And then all of a sudden, a couple of years later, we have all these people getting arrested for fraud, for the misappropriation of that money. So we got to have some kind of checks and balances there. But the checks and balances often take a long time. And when that happens, I think a lot of times regular people it's hard for them to understand all the bureaucracy that's at work here and all the politics that are at work here. And it can get very frustrating. And so I think that we have to find some kind of way to streamline how money is allocated for these type of efforts. And that was starting to happen. Right before Biden left office, he had put out a report saying, listen, we need to figure this out. This is going to be an issue. We need to figure out federal pots of money. We need to figure out all the federal agencies that can streamline a process that can make this very much quicker in the way that we need to respond to these communities when this is needed. But then the Trump administration came in and in less than a month, they wiped all of that.
Yeah.
So there's no indication that the federal government wants to have this conversation or intends to have this conversation going forward. And like you said, the insurance market is just like another bubble that's waiting to burst. And I think that you're right about that. I think that's going to be the driving factor in regards to who lives where. And I think a lot of these people will just be like, I can no longer afford this. I can't live here. So then I guess the only people that will be able to live in coastal communities are going to be upper class rich people that can afford it.
Yeah, say hello to Florida. Okay, you queued me up for my next question about insurance. It's increasingly driving decisions where people kind of live, and the market is actually playing out. But I'm just curious because people that are still living in this community, did that come up? Are they even getting insurance? Because there's no way that any insurance company is probably providing in this particular community.
They're not. They're just braving it. And that's the thing. I think that's something that I did a story a couple of months ago about the insurance bubble in Louisiana. And one of the experts I talked to basically told me that a lot of people in Louisiana and along the coast are going to do the same thing. They're just going to forego having insurance, homeowners insurance. They can't afford it anymore, and they're just not going to have it. And what does that do? It's probably going to drive even more poverty here because we're going to keep having hurricanes. That's a given. But are we going to have the insurance that people need? That's a really big question mark. And no one has the answers, not even state leaders right now. And there seems to be no political will to want to fix it right now.
This can't be an episode about Louisiana if we're not going to talk about the oil and gas industry. And so how did they're obviously huge players in the state. Were they influencing at all? Because obviously they're in these coastal areas. Do they think this is helpful to relocate people? Or are they getting in the way? What's that dynamic?
When it comes to the oil and gas industry, some people that we talked to basically said that the state will allocate money to protect the oil and gas infrastructure, but will not protect the communities. And that seems to be the case. The oil and gas industry has a say, but their say tends to be to protect their interests and not necessarily the people's interests. And that's always been an ongoing fight here in Louisiana. It's the fact that people feel like the oil and gas industry has a very tight hold on our political leaders here. They have the money, they promise all these jobs and this economic development, and people feel that our state leaders fall for it. And there has been no conversation that I've seen, nothing that I've come across in my reporting that showed me that the oil and gas industry felt like the federal government should move people out of harm's way. If anything, the oil and gas industry felt, let's protect our stuff to make sure we can still produce our products that can help the global economy, basically.
I want to pivot and talk about just covering these kind of issues too. As a reporter, as I said earlier, I love talking to reporters, but just more of a kind of a check-in. Now, I'm still a little confused that there was all this money to help the community move. Some people decided to stay. A lot of people were unhappy with the process, but the current state of events is that some people are still there. Some people have moved. There's no more money to help people move, and that's what's going on. Is that accurate?
That's very accurate. Yeah. And I talk to state leaders, here and say, would this happen again? We know that there's other coastal communities down there, and they flat out just said, we're not in the relocating this. This is not something we would do. We would only do it if the federal government funded this. So as of right now, there are no conversations about managed retreat or community-driven relocation at any state level right now.
Okay, I just wanted to give my listeners what's actually happening right now, and it's never as satisfying as everybody's happily moved and they're happy. No, that's not what's going on at all. It's more of just looking at what went wrong. All right, I wanted to pivot a little here, and so how do you think journalists can do a better job covering climate adaptation and managed retreat? And you think of topics that are outside the traditional disaster or environmental beats. What's your advice, and how can journalists do a better job around those topics?
I think that with managed retreat, it's going to be all about really trying to get a sense of what would make people decide as a whole community that maybe we are in danger and we need to move. Like I said, a lot of people who live along the coast, they do not want to move. And I think that another challenge to managed retreat is that most people don't want the government telling them what to do. And so there needs to be a lot of conversation. I think that a lot of reporters probably need to really be talking to local, federal, and state politicians and governments to figure out why aren't these conversations happening. And maybe the conversation isn't about managed retreat. Maybe the conversation is like what we talked about earlier, is the insurance crisis. And there is power for them to do something about that. They can regulate that industry. And I think that maybe the way to go to get about this in a way that regular people can still have some agency, they feel. I think that people don't want to lose their agency. I think that's a legitimate concern that was brought up to us today. People just don't want the government telling them what to do. And I think we have to really walk a delicate line here, because you have to realize these are people's homes. These are people's properties. These are people's way of life. And we can't just expect them to say that they want to pick up and move just because there's danger right here. So I think a lot of times reporters do have to go into these communities, especially when you're talking about communities that are indigenous, they're Black or brown communities. You have to have this understanding that these are probably people that already feel that they do not have a voice. They already feel that they're going to probably get screwed over by the government. And so you just have to have that mindset of feeling like they still need to feel some sense of agency, some sense of power in their decisions, and also give them the empathy to understand that maybe why they don't want to move, and maybe why we should be putting more pressure on our political leaders to actually care about things like sea level rise and climate change in order to try to mitigate this as much as possible.
Yeah. And again, try to be sympathetic to folks there. No one likes to leave their home. But, in a previous conversation, it's just areas that keep flooding or its long-term outlook is very awful. Should taxpayers still have to provide water, electrical, road building to all these areas that are just going to be degraded just so a few people can live there? And that needs to be part of the conversation too.
Yeah. And it's, what do you do? At what point are we supposed to just wash our hands of this? That's the thing. But it's like, who's responsible for this? Like you just said, Louisiana has let the oil and gas industry come here and run things with a carte blanche check to do whatever they want. And so there are things that we could be doing to protect the coast. Are we allocating enough money to do that? And I would say sometimes maybe we're not. We have the Trump administration now that is pretty much walking back everything that the Biden administration did to try to mitigate climate change. So are we really doing what we could do to protect these communities? That's the really question here. Do we care about the oil and gas industry more than we care about people?
I don't think you want to know the answer to that. So obviously, there's a lot of kind of things that could be learned here, but do you feel like there's anybody, or are there universities or other communities that are trying to learn from this particular experience? Have you encountered those kind of folks at all that, okay, these things didn't work out, but let's learn from this in a very productive way?
For sure. Louisiana State University, LSU here, they've had professors, some of them I talked to and quoted in the article. They've been studying this. They went and studied the Isle of Jean Charles, and they actually even went to other coastal communities. They talked to people about why they'd want to stay, what things it would take to make them move. So these conversations are happening. There's even other universities that are having similar studies that are doing around managed retreat and sea level rise and coastal flooding. So definitely there are people that are doing this at the collegiate level. The thing about it is, are our state and federal leaders going to listen to them? That's the thing.
I don't know if you've heard of it, but Columbia University does a managed retreat conference every couple of years. Have you heard of this group?
I maybe came across this. Yes, I think I have.
I encourage you, I know, just if you get to conferences much, and at least even presenting there, I think a lot of people could really benefit from your experience as a reporter. It's a lot of people there are academics doing some really interesting work, but you are reporting on it. So I think that'd be really useful for folks. So just keep in mind, they had one this year. It'll be another year and a half. But all right. In the article, you actually note that there's no national U.S. strategy for relocating communities at scale. And so would an effective national strategy, what would it need to include? You are not the policy guy, but you have some experience reporting on it. I'm here just asking your opinion. And you're like, what things like institutional roles and financing, what do you think would be really helpful to inform that kind of policy making?
I think one is we need to figure out where would the money come from quickly. So if we can establish at the federal level, here are the pots of money that we can use when we need to relocate a community. Okay. Then we need to figure out what agencies need to be involved with that. And then I think if we can figure out those two things, I think the process can move a lot quicker right there, because you have an established pot of money and you'd have the established agency that is going to handle that. And that can readily go out into a state and say, here, we're here to help. What do you need? I think that's the biggest thing you need to do. Now, at the local level, I think that the communities where you know that sea level rise is going to be an issue, I think they should be already having conversations as well in regards to what state agencies would be involved with that. What people would want to be willing. Like, how many people are we talking about here? I think that knowing a lot of this stuff up front really helps in regards to once it happens, we have a plan in place. I think right now we have no plan in place. With Isle of Jean Charles, it was their chief that came up with the plan. The state or federal government didn't come up with that plan. They did. So I think that you have to have those plans in place in order to do this effectively, or to do it quickly and effectively.
No one really wants to do that. Can you imagine the mayor of Miami having a plan in place for a managed retreat for Miami? They would just run them out of town. And it's just, so that is very difficult. I guess that is the role for the federal government to have those sort of tough discussions. And I was thinking about, okay, look at this particular community. Is it serving as an example? Okay, now managed retreat, adaptation, it's just not going to work. But kind of behind that is like sea level rise isn't going anywhere. These coastal communities will be flooded. So hopefully it's an example of what can we learn from versus, oh, we can't do this.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is how do we approach it? Has this been is Isle of Jean Charles just a lesson of we can't do this? I don't know if that's true though. I think that we can learn from Isle of Jean Charles in terms of what needs to happen. We know that it can happen. They did relocate. These people do live, in an area that's not going to flood right now, at least not for a couple of decades or so. So we know that it can happen, and it has happened at a very small level before. We just need to get a better handle on, I think too, like you said, I think we have to wrap a lot of regular people's mind around the threat of sea level rise. I think that sea level rise has the problem of being like polar bears, where polar bears are so far, they're so distant in people's mind that people don't think that that's not us in danger. So we don't have anything to worry about. I think we really have to wrap the general public's mind around this is really an issue. This is going to be a problem. And that is something that I think our political leaders need to do a better job at. Instead of politicizing climate change so much, we need to really wrap everyone's head around this is a danger. I don't know that certain communities will still be viable when our children are now our age. And I think we need to wrap our heads around that. And I think that's what's really the issue here, is that people think that this isn't going to affect me, so I don't have to worry about it right now.
Yeah, don't even get me started about communicating climate adaptation. We do a horrible job about it. No one really wants to take it seriously. Yeah, we have a long way to go there. Okay. Do you have any favorite climate journalists? You're a climate journalist. You're covering it. And so do you have any favorite that you'd like to read?
No, it's not, of course, ours. I love all of our journalists at Flood. We are a really good team. I read across all of the spectrum. I don't really have any favorite report. I hate when people ask me favorite questions. Even when people ask me what's my favorite color, I don't have favorites. I just like what I like. But I read a lot of Inside Climate News. I think they're really one of my go-tos because I like the fact that they give me a little bit of variety and they do it in a very short, digestible way. I think a lot of times I think the way of long form journalism is going away. And I don't really have the attention span to even my family members. They don't want to read something that's too long for me. They want something that can be easily digestible. And I think that that's one of the things that journalists we can do a better job of is really trying to break this down very simply for people who are just really maybe reading the news while they're waiting for their groceries to be rung up in the grocery line. I think that's really the attention span that we have. And so I do the fact that a lot of journalists are now really going online and doing like these explainer TikTok videos. I think a lot of, especially if you want to reach a younger generation, we obviously know it's going to be happening on TikTok and online and these short form videos. And I think that even at Floodlight now, we're starting to do these short form videos to tell our stories because we feel like you can get better engagement there because you can hold and grab their attention a lot more. And it could be more compelling when they see like the visuals or when they have someone that they trust that is explaining things to them. And I do the fact that journalism is going that way now because I do think that's probably where we need to be, especially if we want to get the younger generation who may be more amenable to understanding climate change.
You don't like favorite questions, but I bet you have a favorite jambalaya without a doubt. So
I'm about to disappoint you right now. I am a Louisiana native who does not like seafood, and I do not like
goodness.
And no, I do not like.
Shame on you.
I know. I'm like, I don't really like gumbo. I am a weird Louisiana people. I cannot believe from Louisiana. I say, yeah, I'm not a huge jambalaya.
No, I get it. I'm not actually a huge gumbo fan myself, but I love Louisiana food. All right. I should have asked you at the beginning, but what is Floodlight? Give us a little bit more background on what you guys do at Floodlight.
So basically, we are, like you said, a nonprofit newsroom. We cover climate accountability. We want to hold the people that have the power to do something about climate change accountable. And now we're doing like a lot of investigative stories to do that. We are a small, close-knit group of reporters, and we are stationed all across the country. We have one in Louisiana, one in North Carolina, and one in New York. We used to have one in Florida that did a lot of coverage there as well. And we're definitely taking more national stories, looking just at who should be held accountable for what is happening to our country and especially to the communities that are most impacted by climate change and industrial pollution.
Last question, and I ask all my guests this, and keep in mind, this is a climate adaptation podcast. If you could recommend one guest to come on the show, who would it be?
Wow. It could be anyone, you say.
But listen, it has to fall under the sort of climate adaptation, but it could be an expert, it could be a community member, whatever, but just that would be a good guest for this show.
But to be honest with you, I really feel like, for me, it would be like I'd go the government official route. And I would love for one of the government officials here, even like the governor of Louisiana, who is now Jeff Landry, who has taken also a Trump approach in regards to climate change. It basically called climate change a hoax. And I would love to have him defend that stance and see how he would defend that stance, especially given the harm that a lot of the communities here have faced because of the oil and gas industry and because of climate change in regards to like the strip of hurricanes. I would love to see him justify this. I want him to explain to listeners, why does he think climate change is a hoax?
I love this. If you have any here's an open invitation to the governor of Louisiana to come on. That would be fantastic. And oh boy, I would have a lot of questions. Maybe I'd reach out to you and you can give me a few questions to ask. Yeah. Terry, it's a pleasure having you on the podcast, and thanks for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me. I love talking about this stuff.
Okay, adapters, that is a wrap. A big thanks to Terry Jones for helping unpack the real story behind America's first climate relocation. And if you want to learn more, be sure to check out his reporting at Floodlight News. I have links in my show notes. We'll keep coming back to managed retreat and climate migration here on America Adapts because this stuff is messy, complicated, and only getting more important. Proper planning And honest conversations are critical if we want to get it right. As Terry and I discussed, there is a lot of coastal land in the United States, and the sea level rise projections are daunting. Okay, some final housekeeping. If you're new to the podcast, be sure to follow America Adapts wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss future episodes. And definitely take a look in the archive. There are 240 episodes out there. And if you found this conversation useful, share it with a friend or colleague who's working to better understand the policies, science, and strategies shaping climate adaptation. You can also sign up for the America Adapts newsletter. I share behind-the-scenes updates, new episodes, and the occasional adaptation rant. We'll keep coming back to stories like this, managed retreat, climate migration, and how communities are adapting on the ground. So stay tuned. If you want to support the show and keep these conversations going, you can find donation links at americaadapts.org or in the show notes for this episode. Okay, adapters, keep up the great work. I'll see you next time.